A federal workforce that's been made up of about 2 million employees over the past 75 years has completely changed. This is due to mass firings and policy changes, and thousands of people have been on a roller coaster ride. So, what's coming up next and how will it impact you? Let's get into it. Much of what has happened was written in Project 2025. This is a massive 900-page playbook that was written and put together by a lot of conservatives and people that are affiliated with the Heritage Foundation, and it essentially served as a to-do list for President Trump for his second term. Now, you can download a copy if you want. It's free. You just enter in your email address. You can save it to your desktop, and you can look through there if you have the time or if you have the desire. The interesting thing about the playbook is President Trump was asked about it multiple times during debates, during speeches. People asked him, what about Project 2025? And he was consistent with the messaging. He said, I've never read it. I don't know anything about it. I've never read it. He did that on purpose because ideas from the playbook, he would get challenged on. The Democrats would use that to challenge him, and he didn't want to deal with that, so he just intentionally, he didn't read it. But we have over a dozen people who have contributed to the playbook who he has appointed in positions in his administration, to include one of the biggest appointments, the director of OMB, Russell Vought. So why do people get so worried about Russell? It's because he was president of the Center for Renewing America. His organization wants to add biblical principles in government and law. He wants to replace bureaucrats with political loyalists and to make federal bureaucrats feel traumatically affected. The goal? To slash the federal government, make it smaller by identifying fraud, waste, and abuse and inefficiencies. And if you can't find enough fraud, waste, and abuse, well, just start cutting it anyway because the government needs to be a lot smaller. But if you read through Project 2025, you would come away with the notion that this is not supposed to be a shock and awe campaign. This is supposed to be a deliberate, methodical process. And that is not what we have seen happen. Is it because when you take one part President Trump, one part Elon Musk, and one part Russell Vought, and you mix them all together, you get something a little faster, a little erratic, a little messy. Fast forward 3 months later, they didn't just make strategic cuts here or there. They completely obliterated agencies like the CFPB, like the Department of Education, like USAID, and more. DOJ fired tens of thousands of workers, and they tested every legal boundary and left chaos in their wake. According to the recruitment firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas, the Trump administration has already laid off or plans to lay off 280,000 federal workers and contractors across 27 agencies. That's over 250,000 workers that are either laid off now or they plan to be laid off in the near future. And that impacts the entire country. It's not just DC. It's not just the swamp. 80% of these jobs, they're located outside of the DC area. So it's going to impact a lot of smaller economies that were dependent upon the workers there buying products and services within that town. Now, we're seeing some people sympathize. Some people empathize. There are many states out there where the governors are encouraging the federal employees who have been laid off to apply within their state. And a lot of times it's within their state government, but also other companies as well. These states include Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, Hawaii, and New Mexico. Others say, welcome to reality. I deal with this every day in the private sector. We don't have any protections. We don't have any rights. So why should you? Join me and let's suffer together. They're also applauding President Trump every time an agency goes down or a federal employee loses their job. They think it's a wonderful thing. This is exactly what they voted for. The first move came with the federal hiring freeze on January 20th. Then they targeted the DEI offices. They completely dismantled the offices. They put those individuals on administrative leave. Shortly after that, you had the fork in the road email that resembled what Elon Musk did at Twitter. A lot of people, I would say half of the federal workforce, they didn't even believe that the memo was legitimate. They didn't think the program was legitimate, but we still had about 75,000 people accept it. After that, we saw the probationary purge, where people on probationary status were just losing their jobs for no reason. They performed great, they had amazing conduct, they were a great contributor to the team, but that didn't matter. Then we had two federal judges, one in California, one in Maryland. They said reinstate those workers because it was illegal. Supreme Court comes along and says you can't do that. You can't force them to reinstate them. But the actual merit on if firing them was illegal or not, that's still up for debate. All of that happened within 2 months. It still has a lot of people's heads spinning. Next was the new Schedule F. They've actually shifted away from calling it Schedule F. It's called Policy and Career now, but the intention is the same. So it's going to remove civil protections from government jobs that deal with policy, and probably more than that. So the official list on everybody who is now an at-will employee, that will come out a little bit later. But in the midst of all that, we have the RIFs, right? The reduction in force. That's going to get rid of at least 100,000 or more federal workers throughout the summer months. And what I don't understand, and maybe you can help me out here, is you have the deferred resignation program. That entices federal workers to resign. Wouldn't it seem like a better idea to let the worker know, like, hey, you might be subjected to a RIF due to your position not being mission critical. So because you are in jeopardy, maybe that's additional incentive to take the deferred resignation. But they're not doing that. HR, the agency is not letting the employee know, like, hey, you're in a high-risk position right now, and maybe you should take the DRP. That conversation isn't really being had. And to be fair, HR right now, they don't really know a lot of stuff. HR is often kept in the dark until the last few minutes, and then all of a sudden they have to rush to execute. But it seems to be much more effective if you could let offices know, like you're a high-risk office, we're going to have to cut you by 75%. That would probably result in more people volunteering to resign, and then that way they get paid full pay and benefits for so many months until September 30th. Now, I don't know why that's not being done. Okay, so what about federal unions? Well, Project 2025, they suggest that unions probably shouldn't exist. The president largely agrees. He stripped TSA workers of their bargaining rights, and the union sued. Then there's an executive order banning collective bargaining for 2/3 of the feds, citing national security. And then there's the return to office mess, which really didn't have to happen. Not the way that it did happen, because elements of telework exist in a lot of companies, in a lot of jobs, to include the federal government, way before the pandemic ever got here. Teleworking is something the government still does when there's inclement weather. If it's a snowy day, if there's a lot of rain, a thunderstorm, a tropical storm warning, they're going to ask you to telework. So telework is an important component of working in general. Without politicizing it, it's just important. And what's being done here over the last few months is largely for optics. They're showing the public like, hey, we have the power. We're bringing all these people in because they're lazy, they're not working, you're not getting enough value for your tax dollar. You're working, you're a mechanic, you're fixing cars. You're in the restaurant, you're cooking, you're serving food. So why shouldn't the civil servant do the same thing? Even though a lot of those responsibilities, a lot of the duties and tasks that the federal worker is doing, a lot of them could do it at home. They probably would have better internet connection. They would get more done because they don't have to struggle through a 2-hour commute, 1 hour there, 1 hour back. And that's best case scenario. Some people are driving a lot further than that. But it's this impression. It's really political pressure. So what has been done is they're coming back into these buildings that are not even equipped for them. So people are getting stuffed in broom closets in some situations. They're going into conference rooms that are already packed, 25 workers there. You got your elbows bumping into one another, and then the internet connection, and then mold, and then the water fountains don't work, and then the elevator's broken, all these issues. It wasn't something that was well coordinated and deliberately planned. What some people fail to realize is these buildings never held 100% capacity of federal workers. Never have they done that. And all the while, DOJ is over here closing over 400 federal buildings. So where do they go? But it's not just about jobs. It's about the average American individual who probably doesn't feel like they're impacted by the federal government at all until they need Social Security to pay them disability benefits, until they need the Veteran Affairs, until they need to talk about their tax situation with an IRS customer representative, until they want to travel. Go outside, open your door, look around. Those roads, the highways, that's managed by the federal government. The air traffic controller to make sure your flight, lands safely, takes off safely, that's the Department of Transportation. That's FAA. That's federal government. Joe from Project on Government Oversight said, "This is worse than we feared. A brain drain's coming. Scientists, researchers, experts are fleeing for the private sector." Ironically, taxpayers might end up having to pay more in the long run. There's a cost to firing and rehiring. There's a cost to outsourcing to contractors. If you look at what President Clinton, Bill Clinton, he did in the 90s, he reduced the federal workforce to much applause. It was a wonderful thing, Bill Clinton. But what ended up happening is they didn't have enough people to do the work, so they outsourced to contractors. So you saw the number of contractors explode throughout the early and mid 1990s. So there was no cost savings. Yeah, it looked good on a sheet of paper or when you're giving a speech behind the podium. It looks great. I reduced the government by 50%. But how much did that cost you? Was there any real savings in that action? A lot of times, there wasn't. And then you have to think, what happens when the next president comes into office and they want to revive the education department? They want to revive the U.S. aid. It takes money, energy, effort. It takes a lot of resources to restart an agency. So what's next? Lawsuits galore. You have the unions with dozens of lawsuits. They're still pending. We're waiting to hear from the appeals court, from the Supreme Court. The merit of the cases when it comes to the probationary workers, that has not been ruled on yet. So they still have to rule whether it was legal or illegal. Then on April 14th, we have agencies submitting round 2 of their RIF plans. So you're going to see thousands of more cuts. April 20th, 50,000 workers are going to lose their civil service protections. It's a legal and logistical nightmare. And as for Elon Musk, well, his special employee status, that expires next month. He's going to be on the way out of Doge. Now, he'll still be an advisor to the president, and he'll still have influence. But speaking of Elon Musk influence, what happened recently is he went to Wisconsin, and he wanted to make sure the conservative judge won the election. So he spent $25 million in order to influence that election. And it was a disappointing result for him because the other judge won by a 10% margin. So a lot of people are saying maybe Elon Musk is losing some of his influence when it comes to the political influence he once had. As for the Supreme Court ruling that just happened just a few days ago, a lot of people were surprised by it, especially about how quick it came out. If you're interested to know more about that, I want you to check this video out next. Stay updated by signing up to the free newsletter down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.